keep my eye on the clock. Okay, welcome back after the break. I hope everybody survived the flu. There's a lot of it going around everywhere. This is the 12th class that we've had. I will be available until I start teaching the course up on the hill at the university on the 31st of March. So this could either be the halfway point in our course, or it could be just the 1/3 point, depending upon how enthusiastic you remain during the course of these discussions. Part 1 was basically a kind of cursory overview of a couple different issues, a few different issues actually. We covered the issue of the present state of government and politics with kind of a special focus on the issue of global climate change and its relationship to transnational corporate capitalism and the rising of a national security state. And we'll have some more specific discussion about that later in the course. But we touched upon the issue of a phenomenon that I just touched on briefly that was raised by Peter Dale Scott in his book called The Deep American State, in which he pointed out that the national security state was actually based around a group of people that had been involved in a program that is called the Continuity of Government Project. And this was a project that was started under the auspices of Dwight D. Eisenhower, trying to figure out that if in fact there were a total nuclear exchange between the Soviet Union and the United States, what radical steps would need to be taken to maintain the continuity of the American government. We just barely touched upon this issue of the rise of the national security state, this fascist state, this element, this sort of in the background behind American and Western policies. But that was one of the subjects that we covered in just sort of a general manner in the first, if this were to be the first third of the course, kind of getting some of those issues out in front of us. So we have kind of a common vocabulary and concept structure to talk about those things. The second issue that we dealt with was the present state of the sort of philosophical, scientific, and theological state of reality, the present kind of operating thesis about the nature of reality as it relates to cosmological concepts of the teleological unfolding of the universe, the ontological question of the role of consciousness and its origins and nature in the universe, and its epistemological questions of what particular faculties or means do we have at our disposal as human beings to actually ascertain the answers to big cosmic questions like those. That was the second issue that we directed our attention to. The major focus of that was trying to determine what the factors were that went into making up a particular mode of ethical reasoning that would underlie one or another particular worldview. And I had touched upon this issue of worldviews, trying to figure out how important it was, this discussion that's going on about the Newtonian Cartesian materialist worldview of the scientific logical positivists in the process of being replaced by a new quantum theory of reality. And we touched upon that again, that my sense is that the degree to which we've covered any of those things would probably justify that being just sort of the first third or so of the course, so that we could get those issues out in front of us. We haven't had a lot of vigorous discussion and debate about those things. It's been mostly kind of an expostulatory process where I've sort of set forth what I understand to be the present status of those conversations. The third issue that we touched upon in the first third of the class is the body-mind problem. This classic problem in the field of philosophy, trying to discuss the relationship between human consciousness and the physical body. We touched upon issues such as the subtle energy fields, the chakra system, potential subtle energy fields that are in the universe, and what the relationship may be between any type of faculties that we have, and our ability to discern subtle dimensions beyond the reach of our 5 normally acknowledged senses. And we talked about that in the context of Professor Crane Brinton's observations that he made back in December of 1967 at Harvard University in his final lecture that we've touched upon a number of times, of his belief that we as a human family were on the very brink of stepping over into a new phase of biological evolution that was characterized by the development and evolving of a faculty by means of which we could directly and experientially discern this subtle energy phenomenon that bound every single ultimately irreducible inchoate quantum field in the universe into one unified harmonic whole. So we touched upon that question of the body-mind relationship and what type of biological or physical contributions there were to this issue of consciousness. And fourthly, I've explored in brief at least the potential viability of the development of a schematic pursuant to which one could lay out the different philosophies and modes of ethical reasoning and cosmologies, etc., of the great thinkers of the world in some sort of teleological fashion that might be meaningful and helpful. And then just, I was asked in the final 2 sessions of the first third of our course to just at least touch upon, before we moved into the second phase of our course, to touch upon the issues of 9/11 and what I thought might have happened there, and the issue of extraterrestrial intelligence and UFOs. In that latter category, I mentioned to you that the Jesuit order, the largest single order in the Catholic Church, the largest denomination in Western civilization, it had actually issued a call back in October of 2011 from Castel Gandolfo over in Rome, calling for a vigorous conversation on the part of the laity and the scholastic world of the potential philosophical and theological implications of potential upcoming contact with an extraterrestrial civilization that was a highly technologically developed civilization that may in fact be millions of years in advance of us, technologically at least. And so what I want to do in part 2 is I touched upon at the end, before the break, I touched upon that in part 2 of the class, Andrew and I want to have a discussion, a dialogue that is going to be discussing a number of issues, not a debate, but a dialogue from 2 slightly different perspectives at least. Mine being a perspective based upon my having spent about 45 years litigating major public policy issues, ranging all the way from birth control and whether unmarried people have a right to birth control, all the way to the Pentagon Papers case and Iran-Contra and a number of other cases we've touched upon, and being the chief counsel to Jesuit National Headquarters in Washington on their public policy issues, and being one of the people at the State of the World Forum discussing new major public policies in the post-Cold War period, and Andrew being a young up-and-coming scholar in the field of philosophy, being extremely familiar, vastly more familiar than I am, with the specifics of the thinking of many of the great thinkers of the world that have turned their attention to some of these issues that I've touched upon and had occasion to investigate myself during my career because of my interest in these things and the relationship I thought that those things had to what it was I was doing. And that that I ended up being able to persuade Andrew to participate in this by explaining to him how serious I was about not wanting this to be any kind of a debate or argument at all, but to be a constructive dialogue. I told him about, I want to be brief about this, but one of the cases I did that when I was the legal counsel for the Native American Rights Committee for ACLU National, back in 1975, I was called to go up to northern New York because up at the 6 Indian Nations up in northern New York, the so-called Iroquois Confederacy, the state of New York had decided they were going to sell off a portion of the land that belonged to the 6 Indian Nations to Finch and Prine, a major logging company and timber company in New York. And a number of the Mohawk braves decided they weren't going to allow that, and they pulled their pickup trucks across Highway 9 in Route 87 up into northern New York and shut down the highways and leaned out across the hoods of their pickup trucks with their 30-06 hunting rifles, etc., and stood down the big trucks and bulldozers that were being brought in to bulldoze down these trees. And the New York State Police came out, and there was something starting to again threaten a thing, sort of a repeat of the occupation at Wounded Knee, which had taken place just 18 months earlier. I got called in to represent the Native people in that particular occasion. And one of the first things I told them is, don't trust white people. They were going, oh, we got to sue these people, we got to go into federal court. I said, look, don't trust white people. I mean, especially don't trust white lawyers and judges, because they're not fair-minded, and they're not going to be objective about this. And so I said, we have to think of some other way you might want to address this problem, other than the violence that's pending here. And so that Tom Cook, the son of the blood chief of the Mohawks, actually out of the Bear Clan, asked me if, he said, would you, I'll tell you what we'll do, would you like to participate in a sweat? And I said, great, sweat, hot tubs, steam baths, sure, I'd be happy to do that. And so he said, well, we're going to have the sweat, we're going to have the medicine men of the 6 Indian Nations are going to come, and we're going to have a sweat, we're going to have you be in it, and so we'll see what we're going to do. And I said, great, this will be cool, And so it was December 21st, I remember, 1974, actually it was, and so I was right at the edge of the Mohawk River, up in the 6 Indian Nations, and I go over to the house of the young medicine man of the Mohawks, and it was like 4 o'clock in the morning or so, and he was getting up and knocking around making some coffee and stuff, and his wife was sitting there knitting in the chair, and these other guys, these other 5 men, sort of pulled up in their pickup trucks, and they had their big red and black checkered flannel coats on and their boots and stuff. And they come into the house, and they all started stripping down and took off all their clothes completely, and it was like about maybe 10 degrees outside at the time, and about maybe 4.5, 5 feet of snow on the ground up there in northern New York. And so, and then they all went on the porch, and they all started walking out into the cold. So I took off all my clothes, and I go out walking out into the cold, and Tom Cook was following along behind me to try to explain to me what was happening here. And we walked out across the driveway, and there were like 5 feet of snow out there across this big gigantic field out there. And I was thinking, let's see, men bare naked walking in 5 feet of snow, this is going to be cold and dangerous. And so I decided I was going to follow along with them, and I was following right in their footsteps. I would put my feet right into where their footsteps were, and walking out across this field, and I looked out, and I saw this great big wooden teepee thing. It was these great big logs all stuck up together in the form of this teepee, and there seemed to be like a fire going under them. And so as I was walking out across this 10-degree field of the snow, I was going, oh, warm, this is good, I'm going to get to where it's warm. So I started going out across the field and really freezing, and the snow would melt when your foot went on it, and water would be on the bottom of your foot and it would start to freeze. It was that cold out. And as I came up to where this big fire was going, I went, oh, this is great. And we got up near the fire and we started walking around the fire. And I noticed that these 6 guys and Tom Cook, they were turning toward the fire like this as they would walk around, and then they would turn their back on the fire and they would walk around the fire, and they were keeping themselves warm in a very intelligent way. And as I noticed that as they were walking around the fire started getting hotter and hotter and bigger, and the logs caught on fire, and there was this big kind of roaring fire going. And we were like about 3 feet away from this fire, and it was getting really, really hot. And what I discovered is that they started turning faster and faster and faster around this fire because it was so hot. And then they would hold their foot up and dry the bottom of their foot off from where the snow was melting on their foot. And then they would hold their foot up and turn around. And as they started going faster and faster and faster around this fire and moving faster and faster and holding their feet up, they were in this kind of total ritual dance, like relationship with this fire and the freezing cold that was outside of them. And just as I was saying, this is terrible. I'm going to die here. I'm going to get like 3rd-degree burns. I mean, here I am 3 feet away from this kind of blazing fire in the middle of the thing. I got to be out of my fucking mind to be trying to do this. Yeah, but I kept saying, no, this is important. They've asked me to do this, and so I'm going to do it. So I kept going around the fire, and just as it was getting to the point where I thought I was going to get 3rd-degree burns, and I kept noticing these guys kept glancing over at me to see how I was handling this thing. And just as I was getting ready to go, okay, that's it. This is crazy. I'm going to get killed here. And all of a sudden they went, and they stopped, and they turned and they filed off into this field. And single file, they went over to where this great big hump was in the snow, and they dug down in, and the Mohawk medicine man flipped open this big leather door, and it was like complete pitch black down in there. The sun was just coming up now. It was just starting to come up across the Mohawk River. I looked down in there, and you could see down in there was grass, like 5 feet down at the bottom of all the snow, in this big circle down in there. And they went down into this little like igloo thing. I went down in there with them, and there was grass. There was actually green grass down in there around this great big hole that was in the middle. And we sat down in there. Everybody sat down in this little kind of lotus position around this hole. And then they flopped the door closed. And then all of a sudden I realized it was like 10 degrees in this place, and it was like freezing cold. And here we are sitting on the grass underneath in this pitch black place. And I mean pitch black. I was going like this. I was going, just seeing. I couldn't see a thing. And so we were sitting in there, and it was getting colder and colder. And I could hear them going like this, going, on their body, trying to keep the circulation going in their body. And so I was going, boy, this is getting really cold in here, but this must be what it's about. I thought this was a sweat, actually. So they flip open the door, and one of the guys outside was completely all bundled up in this big fur hat and big cloak. And he has a pitchfork, and he rolls this big rock down into the little hole in the middle among us there. And then they closed the door again. I looked down, and there was this bright red rock, and it was like translucent. It was so hot, and I could look down into the rock, and you could see down inside the rock. It was translucent. It was so hot, but it wasn't giving off any light. It was so dense that the light wouldn't come up off this rock. It just clung right to the rock like that. I still couldn't see anybody in the whole place, but if I went like this, I could see my hand in between myself and the rock. That was all I could see. And then they opened up the door, and they handed in this big tortoise shell, a great big tortoise shell. They handed in to the Mohawk medicine man in a big pine bough. And they closed the door back up again, and it was pitch black again, and he started this chant, going, and he was singing. And Tom Cook, who was sitting next to me, started translating, is that he was chanting to the sun, that this represented the sun, and it was the source of all life for them, and that life had come up out of the energy of the sun, and they were singing this thing. And then I heard him go slosh, slosh into the water, this ice cold water that had been taken out of the Mohawk River. They'd cut a big hole in the river and taken the water out and put it in this tortoise shell. Then they'd take it, they slosh around and they go slash onto the rock, and it went, and this huge steam filled the whole place. And on each little droplet of the steam that filled up this little igloo-like place that we were in, that it reflected off the red rock. So every one of these little droplets of steam was complete bright red, and it lit the whole place up in this bizarre red color. And here were all these 6 guys staring at me, right? They were all looking at me, and I was going, this is very strange what's happening here. Then but it all evaporated and it all disappeared, and then it was pitch black in the place again. And then about 5 minutes later, they open up the door again and roll in a second rock, and put the second rock in there. And I remember I was trying to, because I had been staring down into the center of this major red hot rock before, so I'm staring down into trying to look into these 2 rocks, and I realized that you couldn't look into the center core of both of these rocks at the same time. That you either had to stare into one or the other, or you had to back up with your focus and kind of try to take them both in at the same time. And I was in the midst of this kind of strange experience that I was having, and he started singing again. And he was then singing to the Mother Moon, that the Mother Moon combined with the Father Sun. And that what they did is they had generated the original life on the planet. And he went through this whole thing, rolling in a third rock and slashing the water on it. Every time then when the water would get put on the rock and it would fill up the place with steam, I go, oh great, now we get some relief, there's some heat here coming. Well, it turned out that we stayed in that sweat lodge from about 4:30 that morning all the way through the entire day, all the way deep into the evening of the night. And they just stacked these round stones, one on top of each other, until there was this gigantic pyramid of stones in the middle that was just sitting there in between. And every time they started to slosh the water onto it was terrifying. I mean, it was absolutely terrifying. I had never experienced as much pain as that in my entire life, because they would slosh the water on top of these rocks, and this scalding hot steam would completely fill the entire place. And you couldn't breathe, and you couldn't live, actually. I realized through this experience. And so I was and it turned out that it was the first time that I had prayed since I was a sophomore in college, when I'd realized what bullshit all that stuff was, about, big white guy sitting on the throne with a big beard, and, all these people turning water into wine and stuff like that, which I knew was a total crock of shit. I said, that can't be true. So, but here I was now on death's door, and supplicating some great infinite and eternal something, anything, to have me live through this, because I couldn't breathe and I couldn't do it. And then I discovered, only by experience, that they were going to keep this up until 2 of the medicine men passed out. One guy all of a sudden went down, bang, completely passed right out, And I went, oh good, maybe they'll stop. No, they didn't. Guy kept throwing the water on top of this thing, and we were all going, until the second guy passed out. But as soon as the second medicine man passed out, they stopped completely. And they flipped open the door, and all this big red hot steam goes swooshing out to the outdoors like that, And we sat in there, and about maybe 5 minutes later, they both individually sort of came back into consciousness, right? And then the Mohawk guy led us out, and we came out of the sweat, out and under the stars, and it was like deep. It must have been 2:30 in the morning, the following morning, that we'd been in there all that time, right? And here are these stars sitting right on top of you, of course, up in northern New York. I mean, it's like 46 degrees north parallel up there. And so we were out, and here are all these people from the tribe all standing around out there waiting for us. And they had these blueberries and raspberries and and all kinds of natural foods, all the nuts and stuff, all waiting for us, right? So we come out of this sweat, we throw ourselves down into the snow, and you go, psh, it just melted right down to right down into the snow. I remember laying in this hole that was the exact same shape as me, looking up out of this hole in the snow with the stars in the shape of a human being, up in the sky. And I was going, this is really far out, what's happening here. And then all of a sudden, then one of the native guys, whether it was Onondaga or the Seneca or one of the tribes, their medicine started chanting. And it turns out he was chanting what his vision had been when he was passed out. That he remembered it in detail, and he's saying the entire vision of what it was that he had seen. And he got all the way to the end and then stopped. And I was lying at the bottom of this hole looking up into the stars like this, right? And then there was a minute or two of silence. And then the second medicine man started chanting, singing his vision that he had had. And he sang his vision and then stopped. And a minute or two passed, and then the Mohawk medicine man started chanting, and he was weaving together the two visions that he had heard. And he wove them together and came up with this idea of what they were going to do and how they were going to address this problem. And it turns out that that's how the 6 Indian nations have had the great white roots of peace, the Akwesasne, for 1,000 years in North America. And it's why they've never been part of the United States. There's a gigantic section of New York and southern Canada that have never been part of the United States or Canada that people don't even realize. All right? And so what they did is they agreed to go and they filed the lawsuit in court and demanded a declaratory judgment declaring the property to be theirs. And the first thing they did, we come into the courtroom, and here's the United States Attorney from New York State, the Attorney General from New York State. They're all sitting there, and we come on to make our presentation. And the first person we called was an old blind medicine man who was going to come on and he was going to read this beaded deerskin bag, which was actually created right after the negotiations with Benjamin Franklin and Alexander Hamilton that they had, the chiefs had, and it described the details of all of their boundaries of their land. And he read the beaded bag, and the U.S. government had their own translator that was translating it into English, and they translated the whole thing. And that by the time he got done testifying, there wasn't a single person in the entire room that had any doubt whatsoever that these were the boundary lines of the great Indian nation. And when he completed his testimony, the United States Attorney picks up all of his papers and books and everything like this, and gets up and walks across the room like this and came over and sat down at our table and changed his position, and the case was over just like that. So I raise that because it's this concept that Andrew and I have in mind, that it is not going to be a debate, it's not going to be any kind of an argument. What it's going to be is an attempt to bring our two experiences together with you, to try to weave together some kind of greater insight into some of these fundamental questions that we want you to have the privilege of thinking about and reading about and talking about in the course of the rest of your education that you're going to be pursuing. Okay, so this is what part 2 is going to be. And as to whether or not there'll be a part 3 to the course or not is going to be completely up to you. But we're going to be spending from January 12th, next Monday, through to about February 21st or so with these discussions. And we'll see how the process goes of involving you in the discussions, and we'll figure out what we want to do. We're going to be meeting tomorrow and discussing exactly how we're going to proceed on this, but that's the general thesis. But what I wanted to do in the remainder for tonight, after having set the stage for this discussion, I want to do three things. I want to make three announcements to you. One of them is that, and I don't know if you heard it or not, but on January 1st, for those of you who are up, on January 1st, that Pope Francis issued an announcement that he is going to be issuing a papal encyclical, the highest and most authoritative teaching document in the Catholic Church. He's going to be issuing a papal encyclical on or about March 21st on global climate change and transnational corporate capitalism, which is going to be a profound and fundamental critique of national state capitalism and the role that it's playing in the destruction of the environment. And the state capitalists are going bananas over this. And he's got all kinds of incoming going on already, trying to carve what he's going to say. But he's getting ready to issue this statement. And now, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit. But now the second thing that I want to do is I want to tell you that what's happened here is that that during the course of the vacation, I was approached by a benefactor who has offered to purchase for us the Franciscan House of Studies up at Berkeley, at the University of Berkeley, up on Holy Hill. It's immediately adjacent to the Episcopal Divinity School of the Pacific, right next door to the Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley, literally, right next door to it. And so they're willing to purchase this for us and to purchase the lease of a portion of Easton Hall on the campus of the Episcopal Divinity School, and for a new paradigm institute. The objective would be to study this entire phenomenon that's going on now about this purported paradigm shift that is underway, shifting from the previous belief in the Newtonian, Cartesian, scientific, logical, positivist, materialist worldview to this new worldview based in quantum physics and string theory and other cutting-edge discoveries in the field of physics and in the field of biophysics with human energy fields and the other things that we've been talking about here. And we're going to be having an opportunity to convene conferences there at Easton Hall. They have a large space about the size of this, with big, huge conference tables and fireplace and social centers and all that for us to have access to. And we have been offered. I just had the latest conversation this afternoon at 3 o'clock with Joseph Firmage. Joseph Firmage is the former CEO of a thing called US Web. It's a major computer corporation that actually advised all the major corporations on how to transition over into the use of computers back in the 1980s. And he ended up being a billionaire by the time he was 29 years old. And he has begun a new company called Many One, which is they're going to become the webmasters to the world, setting up little stores like little men's warehouses like around the country in providing webmaster services for small companies and corporations and churches and public interest groups and individuals. You can come in and get top rate advice on how to set up your own web page and how to use your computers and have your own blog and everything else. And he's going to be contributing 2.5% of all of the gross profits every month from that company to the institute. Okay, so that so that's the second announcement I wanted to make to you, because this is going to lend a very concrete and focused context to the conversations that we're going to be having. Because for those of you who are interested in pursuing a number of these issues in your academic career, there's going to be a context in which you could conceivably become interns to help work on some of these major issues, both getting credit at your university for it and participating with some of the greatest minds in the world that we're going to be able to bring in as resident scholars there at the Graduate Theological Union at Berkeley. So I just wanted to let you know that. Now the third thing that I'm going to be doing today in the time that we have here, I want to review some of the major issues that Andrew and I are going to be discussing with each other and with you in this second portion of the course. And so I just want to go through these so that you can start to reflect upon these issues and either solicit from us what type of readings you might want to do about these ahead of time. You'll notice that we haven't been very onerous about giving you assignments or writing assignments or other types of things here in this portion of the class so far. But what I'm hoping is that you'll start to become enthusiastic about some of these issues and want to kind of look into them, and we can give you some guidance of things that you can read ahead of time. So I want to give you a kind of a heads up as to what some of the topics are going to be. But I want to point out that they're going to be, my participation in this process is going to be contexted with three very concrete precepts that I want to be bringing to the discussion and kind of framing the discussion of these some 24 issues that we're going to be talking about. And these are going to be the following. The first one is the proposal that would be in front of us as to the potential efficacy of developing a pedagogical device or a schematic setting forth the various human worldviews pursuant to which we might be able to design a mechanism, a pedagogical device, by means of which we can most effectively communicate the information that we have about the cosmological and teleological and ontological and epistemological assumptions that we come to some kind of a consensus about during our work together. So the question would be to study as one of the major issues the viability of such a schematic, of whether or not it's an adequate device, what the dangers of the development of such a device might be, how useful it could be, etc. The second major precept that is going to be prisming at least some of my participation in the discussions is going to be the proposed relationship between a person's worldview and their level of consciousness, whatever we determine that might mean. So we'll have to be exploring exactly what consciousness is, what we mean by this term consciousness. What do the great minds of our human family mean when they're talking about consciousness? This, of course, is the great ontological question. How did consciousness arise in the universe? What is its nature? Is it an epiphenomenon of the interplay between mass and energy? Did consciousness pre-exist the unfoldment into material manifestation of the universe? Did consciousness play a role in the configuration of the universe that makes it function in accordance with any type of teleological process, etc.? And the third premise would be the proposed relationship between one's consciousness and some specific biological phenomenon or faculty. This is some bodily function is there any relationship between one's physiology and one's consciousness? Such as that has been proposed by Teilhard de Chardin, for example, who is now going to be coming. My guess is that Pope Francis is probably going to be issuing some kind of a statement before too long, endorsing or at least lifting the ban on the teaching of Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard de Chardin, I mentioned just in passing in the first part of the class, was a Jesuit paleontologist who discovered Peking man, and he ended up writing a series of essays theorizing that our human species was in fact biologically evolving up out of lower forms of life, and that there was some sort of teleological tractor force drawing us up into higher and higher degrees of complexification. And that he's one of the people who espouse this particular theory that will be the third precept that I'm going to be returning to a number of times during the discussions that Andrew and I are going to be having with you, trying to explore this question of whether or not there is, as Professor Crane Brinton suggested, some biological faculty that is actually evolving in our human family that gives us direct and immediate experiential access to some unitive phenomenon that bonds all of the inchoate quantum fields in the universe into one harmonic whole. Or some other factor, such as is proposed by Adidas Samraj, for example, or Sri Aurobindo, having to do with the chakra systems and the energy vibrational fields around your body. This is going to be a third area that I will touch upon rather repeatedly during our discussions to try to keep us focused on trying to address some of these practical questions that will be the subject matter of some of the studies at the New Paradigm Institute at the Graduate Theological Union. So let me go through some of the specific issues that you might want to direct your attention to in preparation for these discussions. And Andrew and I, in talking with Craig and Scott and some of the other people that are, and Robert Meister and some others, may work out the order in which we discuss some of these things, but these are some of the major topics that I think would be logical for us to talk about. The first one is, as I mentioned, the intellectual and philosophical viability of the concept of a worldview. Is this a philosophically sound concept of the worldview that has been, in fact, disparaged by some of the more recent thinkers as obsolete in view of the postmodern insights? It's been advocated as a viable concept by evangelical Christians, such as David Haugle, H-A-U-G-L-E, in a major work called Worldviews. He actually espouses the development of worldviews because it enables Christians, he believes, to espouse their fully systematic Christian worldview in comparison and contrasting to others, which I would suggest raises some fundamental questions about the legitimacy of a worldview, if it's designed to be a weapon or a tool by means of which you can vanquish other people's worldviews. This is yet at the same time, there are a lot of new advocates of the worldviews because they're discussing this entire paradigm shift that's taking place to quantum physics, replacing Newtonian, Cartesian, scientific logical positivism, etc. You have people like Ervin Laszlo writing about this. You have people at the California Institute for Integral Studies, Ken Wilber, all kinds of people writing about this whole alleged paradigm shift that's going on. We had the State of the World Forum with Gorbachev, designating as their central strategic initiative the discussion of this new paradigm. and what its import was now that the Cold War was over, to replace the dialectical, confrontational, competitive paradigm that dominated the 20th century. The second issue that we want to be discussing is that isn't it clear that proffering any such schematic of a worldview, a schematic of different alternative worldviews, other than a strictly chronological presentation of different worldviews that have been presented by different philosophers chronologically down through time, if you reorder the order in which you make a presentation of the different philosophies and worldviews of great thinkers, isn't that by itself implicitly suggesting a worldview on your part? For example, a worldview that some of them are more evolved in have higher consciousness than others, such as the schematic that I was suggesting, is that there seems to be some sort of unfolding in these worldviews that would merit you treating them not in chronological order in which they'd been thought up, but in some other schematic that suggests some sort of relationship to each other. So isn't it clear that virtually proposing any schematic other than a chronological one for the great thinkers of the world on these issues is itself implicitly suggesting a worldview that you're kind of not saying. So the third issue is going to be that isn't it in fact clear that asserting any specific factual thesis carries with it some potential of becoming coercive? If you postulate any specific, concrete, clear thesis about reality or about the factual nature of reality, that it carries, doesn't it carry with it some danger of it becoming coercive? If you succeed in persuading 90% of all the people in a given community that this is the truth of the matter, it's going to impose all kinds of potential pressures on people who don't agree with it. And the collective is going to start being tempted to try to coerce everyone into believing what they think is true. So that's an issue that I think we're going to want to discuss. Now, fourthly, doesn't any assertion as to any truth whatsoever, not just some sort of worldview, but doesn't any affirmative assertion of a truth implicitly carry with it the danger of coercion? That you aren't just saying, well, here's what I think, or here's what another person thinks, or so, but if you're actually asserting that this is true, that isn't it clear that it carries with it a danger of it being coercive? So not just a worldview, but any particular fact. Now, in fact, isn't this the danger that is actually the principal motive generating the entire philosophy of postmodernism? That somehow there's the group of people believe that the false assertion of a false positive is more dangerous historically than acknowledging that you don't know something about this particular alleged fact. Because people not knowing any particular position, they suggest, is a lot less dangerous. That the pain and anguish that have been imposed upon people throughout the history of the human family by people who think they know it all and think that they are authorized to force others to comport their conduct in accordance with some set of normative principles that are espoused by those thinkers, has caused more trouble than it has helped. And this is usually espoused by people who have been victimized by such false positive systems, such as women, for example, and racial minorities, and any other minority group of people, or for that matter, free thinkers, or people who are anarchists. That these are people who believe deeply that it is important that people not be allowed or encouraged to postulate knowledge about things that they don't really know about, or they're in fact unknowable, and yet they go about doing that. Isn't that, we want to have a discussion about whether or not that is the principal danger that has given rise to this entire postmodern so-called philosophy. Then we have to raise the question of, isn't it in fact necessary, however, to have a community come to some kind of a consensus about some aspects of reality in order for the community to mobilize itself to actually take action to resolve certain types of problems in the community? Isn't it necessary for some process to be developed by means of which the collective community can come to some kind of consensus about at least some aspects of reality, even if it's only in fact to come to some agreement that a particular problem exists? For example, if in fact the river is overflowing and flowing through your entire village and wiping everybody out, you have to come to some kind of opinion about whether that's good or bad. And you have to come up with some kind of assumptions. And so that isn't there an argument on the other side of the postmodernist fear that there's a real practical necessity on the part of our human family to come up with some conclusions about at least some aspects of reality? This leads us to our number 7 issue, and that is the relative role and responsibility of social policymakers and social critics. This is an important topic, I think, for us in the context of being public intellectuals, is that there's a role for people to play to try to come to certain operational conclusions about reality, making estimates about what kind of problems are afflicting the community, what kind of factual assumptions one makes about what the solutions might be, etc. That type of person, and another type of person who is a social critic, who is there to criticize efforts on the part of those kind of people to do things that they think are mistaken, or that they think don't in fact really help the community that much, or that a person may just think that they're erroneous. You know, that this issue of the respective role of a social policymaker or a social engineer versus a social critic is an important one that I think we want to focus upon in our discussions. The number 8 issue is an actual full-out discussion of the philosophy of postmodernism versus the bona fides of any specific particular worldview. Okay, so that this becomes the actual discussion about postmodernism. And can you compare and contrast it to any other one specific? Is this a worldview? Is this in fact a worldview? I remember when I was asked, I don't know how long, it must have been 10 years ago now, when they first realized I was in town here. They called me from the university and asked me to come up and meet with the head of the Department of Philosophy to discuss whether I wanted to teach at the university. And he asked me for a paper on some of my ideas, and I sent him a note on some of my ideas. And I sat down with him and had the meeting, and he said, where's postmodernism in here? And I said, postmodernism isn't a philosophy. And it was over right there. He basically said, get the fuck out of my office. I don't want to talk to you anymore. You know, and I went, okay, good, it's okay. I got other things to do. You know, because it doesn't strike me as a philosophy. Because it's really saying is no philosophy is legitimate. And they're all dangerous. And one could make a solipsistic argument and say, well, that's a philosophy in and of itself. But I don't give it that much credit. Anyway, so we need to have an intelligent conversation about the bona fides of postmodernism versus the bona fides of some worldview, or even other, even if it's a process by means of which people democratically vote on what kind of worldview they want to implement. Okay, the number 9 issue is we should have a concrete evaluation of a lot of the most salient literature on this issue of the new paradigm. There's lots of it around. And what we want to do is work together to try to figure out what the best materials are around about this new worldview. The California Institute for Integral Studies has got a lot of stuff. As I mentioned, Ken Wilber. There are all kinds of people. The Crack the Cosmic Egg. You know, you go downstairs to Logos and you can find, you know, a dozen different books at least about this new paradigm discussion going on. And it seems to me as scholars, we have an obligation to kind of take a look at all of this literature and determine what, if any of it, is really of major value that could be recommended in a scholastic discussion of this. Okay, you know, you have stuff from the Esalen Institute and et cetera. And if in fact what's going on right now, all of this discussion about the replacement of the Newtonian Cartesian worldview back in the 1920s by the discoveries made in the realm of quantum physics, if this isn't a paradigm shift, what is it? I mean, is there any relationship between the basic underlying assumptions about the world of physics and the other fields of human knowledge? And people don't think about this very often, but that I think, and we'll say so in the discussions, that it seems clear to me that virtually every single one of the basic fields of human knowledge, even the humanities, is predicated upon a certain assumption about the physical nature of reality. And so if you have a radical shift in those fundamental assumptions in the field of physics, then what are the implications for the rest of the fields of human knowledge? And why is it that there's been no major project undertaken to amend these other fields of knowledge right now? So the 10th issue that I want to talk about is whether the concept of a worldview is useful, even recognizing its potential dangers for coercion, even recognizing the limitations of it being completely consistent with absolute reality. Is it useful? And what should we determine about that? And then of course we start getting into the real world. Is any concept actually valid philosophically? This is that entire thing. You may have, I don't know if you've heard about, but I mentioned, I think in passing in the first part of the course, there's an organization that's called the Collège de Pataphysique. And Jean-Paul Sartre was a grand satrap in the Collège de Pataphysique. And what they do is it's a whole gathering of European philosophers who issue a challenge every year for people to send in propositions of truth to them that one assumes is unassailable. And what they do is then they direct their attention to totally destroying it. Okay, just to make it clear that what a buffoon you are if you believe that anything is true, and it is also demonstrably true, that it just isn't so if you think about it hard enough. And so are those of us going through life that are relatively happy just kind of stupid and haven't thought hard enough about it? So is any concept actually real? Or is it in fact just some sort of ephemeral, temporarily constructive tool that one can kind of throw up temporarily to get through a particular conversation, and you get to the end of it and your ultimate conclusion from the conversation isn't any more valid than the assumptions you've made about the bona fides of the concept? And so that this is a question that we have to really come to grips with. Now then we move, I think, in number 12, I think is anything, even any physical thing in the universe, actually real? Okay, I mean, you've heard this one before. Usually when you're stoned, this one comes up. You're going, oh, is this, what's happening to that chair? But this is, the bottom line question here that we want to come to grips with in any kind of major course in dealing with philosophy has to come up with this question: is anything real? Okay? I mean, if you drill down on anything until you break it down into its component chemical components, and then the chemical components down into their molecules, and then down into their atoms, and into their muons and leptons, and stuff. Does all reality disappear if you actually investigate it adequately? And so that we're going to have to take a look at that one. And then number 13, of course, is what role, if any, does human consciousness play in actually actualizing material reality? Now, this could be the big one. This could be the big one of the course that we have to deal with, given the issues of quantum physics and the postulate of just highly potentiated alternative realities in the next microsecond, and the effect of directed human intentionality upon inchoate quantum fields that can actually generate a statistically significant impact upon the manifestation of inchoate quantum fields in the next microsecond. All that stuff. We have to address that. Trying to determine what role human consciousness plays in actualizing material reality. Number 14 is what is the relationship? What is the relationship, if any? It's a sub of the other one. What is the relationship between consciousness and matter in the universe? This is that big creation question. Is the material universe? Does the material universe exist upon its own basis, or is it in fact a function of consciousness? Is there an infinite and eternal sea of completely undifferentiated consciousness that somehow enfolded the material universe into manifestation? Now, you may think this is total horseshit, but the problem is that most of the churches don't. You may think most of the churches are full of shit too, because many of them are. But the question is a serious one, and that is that what they will say over and over and over again, that it is impossible for our universe to be functioning in the way that it is, in the narrow band of manifestation that it actually succeeds in, viewing ourselves as the big crown of success, of course. That how could this possibly happen without some kind of consciousness involved? And you've all heard the old classic is that if in fact you had an infinitely large trash heap with all kinds of different pieces of material things in it, that if you hit it with an infinite number of tornadoes, would one of them actually build a 747? Or is that completely stupid to think that anything like that would happen? And if it in fact is completely stupid to think that anything like that would happen, then how the hell did we get here? And how is it that eyeballs have evolved? I mean, how is it that eyeballs evolved up out of life forms that had no sight whatsoever, had no ability to discern light, and somehow teleologically evolved up into this super complex of an eyeball? If someone's trying to tell you that this was just kind of random, that they're just kind of mutations that happen in kind of a random way, there needs to be some kind of serious study done of this question. And there's, the Dawkins and others, there's all kinds of writers that are just aggressive and hostile atheists who postulate answers to all that. We need to examine those, okay? And now, we have to just come to grips with some of these questions. Is that I've suggested that great thinkers are all very clear about the fact that any thinking human being tends to come to some kind of at least unconscious conclusions about ultimate issues of fact, cosmological reality, as a predicate for how she or he conducts their day-to-day lives. But is that true? I mean, do people really change their lifestyle somehow predicated upon a different conclusion about cosmological origins? Or do they even know what the subject's about? I mean, if you went to Kansas and went to one of the trailer parks and started interviewing people about this, what are they going to say to you about questions like that? And do they pay any attention to it whatsoever? Then you got the number 17. We're on number 17 here. What, if anything, other than one's solely subjective personal opinion or society's collective subjective opinion, make anything, any kind of human action, good or bad? This is the big one. At Harvard College is the favorite course everybody always has. You arrive as a freshman, and everybody overwhelms this one course that says, if there is no God, are all things allowable? That's the 101 course that everybody wants to rush into and get in there. And so that's the question we have to ask ourselves. Is that, is there anything, any ultimate referent that you can identify in accordance with which or in relationship to which any form of human conduct is good or bad? I mean, that for example, is that, and of course the other question is a derivative question is there any source of authority that authorizes any one of us or any collective of us to intervene to try to stop any other person from engaging in any form of conduct that he or she chooses to engage in, even if it's destructive of others? I mean, if it's not destructive of us, I mean, who the hell's business is it of yours? If someone wants to go around raping and killing and eating 3-year-old babies, what the fuck business is it of yours? That's the question. Okay? What business is it of yours if it ain't your kid? And then you come up with these utilitarian arguments of, well, it could be my kid. Well, it ain't your kid. So what's your argument here? What is the source of authority that you think you have to intervene to stop somebody from doing that? And the ancillary question is, what source of authority do you think you have, if any, to try to make a person do something that they don't want to do? Like for example, share their water with a person who's dying of thirst. And they turn around and say, fuck you, this is my canteen of water, and I'm not giving it to them. What do you think entitles you to try to intervene, to try to make them share their water with a dying person? Or, more troublesome, what is it that makes you think you can get some person to share their wealth with people who are dying of starvation? Or dying from diseases that we've known the cure for 100 years. And a person has got more money than they know what to do with. They can't even spend it all. They've got yachts and Mercedes, and they're giving away money to their 15th removed great nephews. And yet they don't give a shit about people dying on the street corners. And they won't share with them. What is it that makes you think that you have any authority to try to make them do that? So that's something that we're going to have to talk about, it seems to me. So now if in fact, for example, science succeeds in answering one or more of these kind of ultimate scientific questions, such as, is the universe ultimately expanding and disintegrating into nothingness? If in fact that does happen, and we are able to verify that it's clear, absolutely beyond cavil, that the universe is in absolute entropy and is going to be disintegrating into nothingness, is that in fact going to have any difference, make any difference to you? About whether you're going to finish your course here, or whether you're going to run off to an island in paradise and smoke your brains out, or why would that make a difference to you? In your normal life. So now, I guess that there's a major question that says is that given the fact that every human being, there are our five senses, just our five senses, that it's quite clear now that our five senses, even as magnified with telescopes and everything else, have been able to find out now that we are able to discern only approximately 4% of material reality. So that 96% of material reality is beyond our access at all with just our five senses. You have all the dark matter and dark energy and the content of black holes and deep space that we don't have any ability to get access to that at all. And so, I mean, how bizarre can you be to think that you have the right to build any kind of rational system of figuring out what ultimate reality is, and then predicating your decisions based on that, when you only have access to 4% of all the reality itself? So what other mode of ethical reasoning other than simple, practical, majoritarian utilitarianism? What other mode of ethical reasoning can you possibly rationally support? Of just saying, look, if there's 100 of us, we'll vote and we'll decide, what choice that we have in front of us, which choice generates the greatest good for the greatest number of us. Period. Because that one is a simple mechanical process, and most of the people feel good about it, because most of the people are going to benefit by it, and the minority of people who don't agree with it, what are they going to propose? We ought to have a thing where the majority votes and then the minority wins. That doesn't make any logical sense. So given this lack of access to ultimate reality, what other kind of mode of ethical reasoning can actually be argued is rational? So the question arises, is there any other reality other than this material reality that we can discern, the 4% of the material reality that we can discern with our five senses, if we magnify them adequately with telescopes and microscopes and in particle accelerators and colliders and all that? What is there any other reality than this material reality? Even very subtle, even if we have very subtle dimensions of reality, such as alternative dimensions, vibrational frequencies, as long as they're electromagnetic frequencies and they're physical, we may be able to ascertain those. But is there any other reality other than that? Should in fact, now here's one that comes up in philosophy that I think is going to be important for us. Should our ability to intellectually project kind of mathematical formulas into the future based upon past that we look at, or physical manifestations, if we can discern algorithmic relationships among the different constituent parts of reality and figure out what that algorithm is, and then project it out into the future. Does that justify us in conducting ourselves in accordance with that as though it were true? Even though we can't see it or hear it or taste it, is that a legitimate process for an epistemological action on our part? Is that rational, materialistic, mathematical capacity that our brain has? Should that really be considered a rational component of epistemology? And this then leads to the big one that we have to come to grips with in dealing with these subjects that we're going to deal with here, is it rational or intellectually acceptable to project from the simple microcosmic observations that we're able to make about inchoate quantum fields and their response to human intentionality? Is it rational to extrapolate from that kind of a microscopic observation into thinking that somehow a human being, by directing our human intentionality towards some outcome, can actually impact, physical reality, on a grander scale than some micro molecules of some sort? I mean, because that's what they're doing. I mean, when you read all of these hocus pocus books on quantum physics and all that kind of stuff, they're all just leaping immediately from these kind of extraordinary discoveries they've made in the microscopic dimensions of reality. They're then turning around and extrapolating into being able to think up your own reality. Make up your own reality, and if you will it strong enough, you're really lulu of ideas, these things. But is that rational to do that? Okay, so that's one of the major questions that we're going to have to ask ourselves. And for example, if you see somebody who can actually sit here, I've touched upon this before, and actually I thought about doing is having you all bring in a spoon. Get a big metal spoon and bring it in, and then go through this process of actually pulling down light from the ether and pouring it into the spoon and melting the spoon right in front of everybody. Because if you don't think that happens, you got a real surprise coming. You got a real surprise coming, because that happens, and I've seen it happen over and over again. And it isn't just super people that can do it. Most everybody can do it. Okay, and this is crossing a certain line that is really important for us in this course, because I want to take you across this line with us and try to understand what the implications of this really are. Because while on the one hand it seems ludicrous to be able to simply mechanically project simple observations that have been made on a super microscopic level about material reality into some kind of super thesis that you can affect reality in the larger world, and yet on the other hand, when you see things like that happen, and I just this is what Dr. Zhenzhou Jing brought me to see when I was in China with her, the head of the Department of Science and Technology at the Chinese Academy of Social Science, brought me right into a room and turned on the film and showed me the film of these people, melting spoons, just going and melting the spoons and looking at compasses and making the needle move back and forth just with their intentionality. And another guy sitting there, moving these dominoes across the table just by looking at them like that. She was freaked out, But she was the head of the Chinese Academy of Social Science, and she was in charge of the Science and Technology Division, looking for how you bottle that energy, how you capture that phenomenon into an alternative energy source. Okay? So what's the story? What's the story on all this thesis about bioplasms and photoplasma around your body and these energy fields they talk about with the chakras and these Qigong people, or whatever they are, that, like the people in here that, look at all the stuff around us, that are all humming and, projecting their energy out around and all that kind of stuff. I mean, is this nuts or what? What's the story on this? As academics from the Hill, down here off the hill, you know, here in the upper room where we can meet together and talk about this in confidence. You know, what is the story about what's going on here with all this photoplasma and energy fields and stuff, and what is the potential role of these energy fields around our body with potentially connecting us into some infinite and eternal field of a bonding phenomenon that bonds the entire physical universe together. You know, what is that relationship? Because people up on the hill, the academics up on the hill, will poo-poo that. And yet, on the other hand, they couldn't pass a test on it if they were given a test on objective reality about what some of the scientific discoveries have been. Okay? And so that suggests to you that there's a certain blindness, a blind spot in the academy about all of this stuff. Okay? And these are the questions that we're going to have to be dealing with. And Andrew and I are going to be having this hopefully constructive weaving together of the different perspectives that we might have on this. My guess is we're going to find that there's a great deal of common area that we have of beliefs or feelings about things, but we're hoping to share that with you and draw you into the conversation. I want you to start finding things and reading these. I want to stimulate your own personal curiosity about these things. I don't want us to have to say, here's the assignment for next week. You know, please go read this. You know, that I want you to want to know about these things, because these things. I mean, I've spent a lot of time out in the field doing lots of, if I dare say so myself, important things, and I am sure that these things are extraordinarily important that we're talking about here. And I've come to it not through any kind of abstract, academic undertaking, but from concrete experience in the field. And I know that the exploration of these issues is going to be very important to you in the rest of your academic life and in your professional life. Okay, so there's the class that's the dividing mark between our first part of our course and our second part, and we'll begin the second part on Monday at 7:15. Okay.
I just have a quick question.